Good afternoon, Miss Cook, and the rest of class. Hello. Um, this is my presentation on the country I chose, Cuba. I'm pretty sure I have to keep this under 5 minutes, so I'm going to get started so I don't waste time. Let's go ahead and click. Okay, the origin. Cuba originally was occupied by three main groups of people: the Chiboni, the Guanahatabe took the western region, and the Taino was taken over by the rest. Little is known about the Westerners, but the Taino people became the reigning. They were peaceful, however, they were striving in the agriculture. Their communities were very large compared to what it was in this time period. In the year 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered the northern coast of Cuba, and later in 1511, the conquistador Diego Velázquez de Soler began to settle. He founded Barbacoa, and he divided the land into 7 main divisions, some as Puerto Príncipe, Santiago de Cuba, San City Spiritis, and Havana. I'm sick, so if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I do apologize. It's just the way my voice sounds right now. Cuba relied heavily on its imports and exports. However, through the 17th century and going into 18th, tobacco and sugar cane was the main main thing that was exported. In order to keep up with this demand, a Havana company was created to boost production. It ended up failing, but Charles III from Spain, during the best part of the century, stimulated the economy, and the population sharply increased from this, increasing the need of the slaves to get the workforce done for how much sugar that they actually needed. From 150,000 to more than 1.3 million people lived on the island between the years 1763 and 1860, with the number of slaves roughly a third of the population, accounting to 433,333. The fight for independence. The demands put on the sugar workers and farmers were too much for many of the people within the country, including capitalist, political leaders, laborers. They couldn't meet the restraints with what they had. So the Cuban people began to realize with this that the Spanish who had colonized them were not perfect for this job. They were inefficient, they were inflexible, and it caused a war between the people and the country Spain. The war took about 10 years. It's known as the 10 Years' War, and it really started with increasing taxes and refusing to grant political autonomy. Excuse me. An Easterner by the name of Carlos Manuel de Céspedes issued the Grito de Yara, or the Cry of Yara, to declare independence of Cuba from Spain. He did have the support of very few, mostly landowners and farmers, who wanted to increase their power and didn't think slavery was right. But a majority of the country, including the slaves, did not want to join, as they didn't think that slaves could be freed so easily. The Second War took place after a pact had ended the first one. Um, because of this, crises began to grow. The promises that were made in the Zanjon Pact were not kept by the Spanish people. This caused anger to erupt within the Cubans. Although we did get slavery abolished, we felt like it wasn't enough from everything else. At this point in time, the Cuban trade was very severe. It was what kept Cuba going, with an annual trade of about $100 million US a year. But because Spain canceled the trade, increased taxes and trade restrictions, the Cubans resisted authority, and in 1895, Maximo Gomez started another revolution. His forces were very quick to take out the eastern region, and they spread west, where the Republic of Cuba was declared in September of 1895. A year after that, Spain placed a general in Cuba to reconcentrate rural residents, but it was more just a way to attack and kill those that lived there. Both the Spanish and the Cuban side fighting against this killed innocent people, burned estates, and even the cash crop sugarcane was taken down. Once Spain took the general back and ended the reconcentration program, it didn't get any better, as during that whole time, an American ship known as the USS Marine sank in the harbor of Cuba and led to a brief war with the Americas. The Castro regime. Fidel Castro actually began as a prisoner in Mexico, who wanted to come over and fix what he felt was wrong with Cuba. His brother Raul, and Che Guevara, a very popular Argentine revolutionary, were attacked on the beach. They felt this was enough for them to wage war and take their country back over. With the fighting in the rebellion, the leader of the country, Batista, fled the country at the beginning of 1959. After he left, Castro rose to the top. He was the first to publicly announce that Cuba was a communist country. In April of 1961, hundreds of $millions in property, private businesses, etc., was nationalized by Cuba. This upset the government of the U.S. to force a trade embargo and an unsuccessful Bay of Pigs invasion, with an attempt to assassinate Castro. This is what really led him to go to the communist side, and even to this day, the family still rules the country. The flag was created in 1849. Everything represents something. The three flags represent the three military districts, and the two white stripes symbolize the purity of a patriot in Cuba. The red triangle stands for the strength of the Cuban people, and the star within it stands for independence. The flag was carried and flown for the first time in 1850 during the battle that was lost by the Cuban people, and even though it was lost, they still felt like the flag represented the perfect. It was a perfect way to represent the Cuban people. Refranes y dichos de Cuba. It's typical sayings in a country that natives will say to each other that only people in a country will know exactly what it means. Um, Americans say them all the time, like, working hard or are you hardly working? Something my dad says quite often is hijo de tigre pintito, which is it translates directly to like father like son, and that one's pretty self-explanatory. This next one, tanto va el barajo a la fuente hasta que la rompe, is a saying that is like for us common workers. It translates to he bathes the straw at the fountain so much as it breaks. How we kind of take it is if you overwork yourself on the things that are too small, you won't see the future as you're putting all your energy into something that doesn't matter. Cuban climate. There are two defined seasons. There's the dry season and the wet season. The wet season is the one that we hear about the most. We have the tropical storms like hurricanes coming in. But during the dry season, that's the better one, where it's nice and warm constantly. It's the perfect time to go swimming. Although year round it stays between 70 to 90 degrees, averaging 82 to 73 during the dry season, and 89 to 80 during the wet season. There's a higher chance of a cold front, but like I said, the serious hurricanes and flooding, and even ordered evacuations are most common during this time of year. Geography. Cuba is the largest country in the Caribbean. It has a square area of 150,006 square kilometers in the mainland. It's the 16th largest island in the world based on the land area, and it's relatively flat, has a few hills and such, but the coastal area becomes more mountainous as you go in. And although the size is great, it has very little inland water areas like lakes, rivers, or ponds. Cuba's income relies heavily on the import and export market. They're a small country, they're an island, they need to be able to import and export. So their major imports are petroleum, corn, and wheat, stuff that they can't grow on their own land. However, their exports are raw sugar, nickel mats, and rolled tobacco, specifically Cuban cigars. The cigars are probably the most famous thing from Cuba. There's some people who feel there's nothing better than a Cuban cigar. However, many disagree. The Cuban country has very little raw materials in its land itself. So a lot of things like machinery and equipment and chemicals have to be brought in from outside resources. The economy. 32% of the exported goods from Cuba are sent to China. But the main places they send their goods to are Venezuela, Canada, Spain, and Brazil. And they typically take in stuff from the same Brazil, China, Venezuela, but also the United States. Cuban food is very important to the Cuban people. However, over 80% of the food is actually imported. And because of this, Cuba has had a hard time paying for it in the past. So in 1961, all Cuban exports to the U.S. and imports from the U.S. are required to be paid for in full cash. The culture is a very huge part of people. Cuban people are who they are because of our culture, the way we grew up. Excuse me. What has happened to us in the past, and what has happened to us as a people. Without our culture, we lose who we are, what it means to be Cuban. Literature has a significant impact on that. During the first half of the 1800s, a new style of literature was born in Cuba. From slavery, the mixing of races, and colonialism, um, these caused it to mix in and create a new style. I mean, one of the most famous Cuban writers, Cirilo Villaverde, wrote the Cecilia Valdez from this time period, and it's one of the most famous books from Cuban history to ever be born. It created a new type of storytelling, which is called testimonial literature. It's a genre that records oral history of a person's life to turn it into a book or a literary work. Religion. A majority of Cubans are either Catholic or Christian. But there is a very popular forbidden religion. It's called Santeria. In 1992, an amendment was made that religious freedom for all the Cuban people. This let the Cuban people have the option to choose what they wish to practice. Santeria is a mixture of the African witchcraft, voodoo, and magic with the Christian and Catholic religion. And it was first practiced by the slaves that were actually brought there to Cuba. Because of this, the people are heavily discriminated against. And it adds on to a racism problem within Cuba, because a majority of those who practice this religion are black because of their ancestors being slaves. But now, to avoid discrimination, it is practiced in secret. Holidays. Cuban holidays are much like the rest of the world, as majority of them are Christian. So they have Christmas and Easter and I don't know any other Christian holidays, but they have those two holidays that are very important and are celebrated yearly. But they do have very Cuban-specific holidays, like May Day, which is a communist holiday that celebrates the beginning of spring. Or the 10th of October, which is celebrated in Cuba to represent the day Cuba began its revolt against Spain, therefore started their independence. Music is a large part of any culture. Cubans actually invented several different types of music. Some well-known styles include mambo, charanga, and rumba. But the most well-known style is actually salsa, which derives from Cuban music. Cecilia Cruz, the queen of salsa, is a Cuban woman from Havana. She began her career in the late 40s, and she just blew up from there. It is also interesting to note that the type of music Cuba's most known for is ballet. The food is the best part of a Cuban home. It is influenced by Spanish, African, Caribbean, and even Chinese dishes. The traditional meal consists of rice, beans, and some kind of pork. White rice, black beans. Black beans are the most common. They're used for absolutely everything. It's known as arroz con gris. As it was mentioned earlier, most of the food is brought in, but the low class can't actually afford it, just with how food rations are given out and how it depends on the rest of the world. It's also interesting to note that Cuban coffee is world famous and is actually imported into the country. The clothing is also very well known. The relaxed style known as gayubera is the most famous style of clothing in Cuba. Men wear classic linen, which can be tailored with embroideries or not, and women will wear dresses with ruffles and layers, just for the hot seasons. The dresses come in colors. They can be this beautiful, extravagant thing for an occasion, or it can just be common wear. Even the pajamas in Cuba are based off of this style. Um, However, many Cuban men and women do wear Western clothing, so blue jeans, sweatshirts, and hoodies, and such. To conclude, Cuba is a country in the Caribbean founded in 1511 by Spanish conquistadors. Over the years, the country has fought and developed itself into what we know it to be today. With their struggles and triumphs, they were able to create a recognizable country, not only for their cuisine and clothing, but for their ruling regime. Here are the sources that I used to complete this. Thank you so much for watching, and I just gonna apologize for having to stop for coughing and just the way I sound, and I probably look horrible as well. But thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to get my grade, and yeah. Bye, Miss Cook.